My name is Julia, and I am 14 years old. When my father died in a sudden car accident, it felt as if the entire world had cracked open beneath me. One day he was telling me stories about how the crops would bloom in spring, and the next I was staring at an empty chair at the dinner table. My mother was hollowed out by grief. My little sister Kayla, only 7, clung to Mom's skirts like a lost kitten too young to understand why Dad wasn't coming back. 6 months after his funeral, before the soil on his grave had even settled, Mom remarried. She brought home a man named Frank. He moved into our farmhouse almost overnight, dragging with him an authority that had never belonged to him. The land, my father's land, had been built with sweat and patience. Every post, every fence, every animal had his fingerprints on it. I felt it was sacred. Frank treated it like a conquest. From the moment he arrived, he disliked me. I wasn't the kind of girl to nod silently when something felt wrong. If I disagreed, I said it. If I felt hurt, I showed it. My father had called it fire in the blood. Frank called it disrespect. With Kayla, though, he was gentle, even tender. He'd ruffle her hair, carry her on his shoulders, laugh as though she were his own daughter. To anyone watching, he seemed a doting stepfather. To me, he was a storm cloud. The changes began quietly. Help with the animals, he said one morning. Just a few chores. By the next week, I was rising before dawn, feeding chickens, hauling water, dragging bales of hay heavier than my body. When the workers left for the day, my shift kept going. Soon Frank fired 2 farmhands. Over dinner, he announced, "We don't need them. Julia can do it. Save us money." My fork clattered against the plate. "I'm already doing too much," I protested, my voice trembling. "You'll do what I tell you," Frank snapped. Mom's eyes stayed on her food, her silence cutting deeper than his words. Kayla sat beside me, swinging her legs under the chair, oblivious. She was excused from the work, free to laugh, with friends, go to school, and live the childhood I no longer had. I told myself I didn't want her to suffer as I did, but the bitterness coiled inside me all the same. School quickly became a casualty. Work is more important than books, Frank insisted, forcing me to miss classes. My grades slid from promising to perilous. At night, after endless hours mending fences or shoveling stalls, I would try to do homework by lantern light. My head would drop into the pages before I even finished the first problem. I tried to explain to Mom. I even held out my palms once blistered and raw, begging her to look. "They hurt," I whispered. She barely glanced. "Your skin will toughen. That's life on a farm." Her words carved into me, deeper than any splinter. It was as though she'd forgotten I was her daughter, not her hired help. I tried to escape through my friends. On a Saturday, I begged to go to the movies with them. "I've worked all week," I said softly, clinging to hope. "You'll work today too," Frank barked. His face hardened like stone. "You're not leaving this house." That summer was the worst. Dawn to night, 7 days a week, no breaks. I learned to shear sheep, deliver lambs, drive a tractor patch machinery. Skills that belonged to grown men were forced onto a 14-year-old girl. My hands stopped looking like a child's. They were scarred, calloused, unrecognizable. Every night I would stare at them, wondering if this was who I'd become, an old farmer trapped in a young girl's body. And somewhere deep inside, a thought began to whisper, dangerous, desperate, "If I don't find a way out, this place will destroy me." The weeks blurred together into a rhythm of exhaustion. Frank's voice became my alarm clock, always shouting, before the sun had even touched the fields. "Get up. Animals don't wait." At first, I thought the farm work was temporary, that once things settled, I could return to being a student, a teenager. But every day the chain tightened. Frank found new ways to pile weight on me, fixing fences, dragging sacks of grain, repairing machinery that broke under his carelessness. One night at dinner, he set down his fork and announced calmly as though he were discussing the weather, "We don't need the hired hands anymore. Julia can handle it." The words lodged in my chest like a stone. "That's impossible. I can't do the work of grown men," I protested. His eyes cut into me like a blade. "You'll do what I say. This is your responsibility now." I turned to Mom, desperate. She didn't even look at me. She quietly took another bite of food, her silence screaming louder than any words. In that moment, I realized she had surrendered her authority to him completely. Kayla watched the exchange with wide eyes. She didn't understand. She didn't need to. Frank never asked her to lift a finger beyond setting the dinner table. Sometimes when she giggled about playing with friends or shared her excitement about school, I felt a venomous jealousy curl in my gut. Then guilt would strike just as fast. I wanted her free of the misery I carried, yet her happiness was also a mirror, reminding me of what I'd lost. My school life deteriorated. Frank decided when I could go, which wasn't often. Books won't put food on the table, he sneered when I protested. This farm will. I would beg Mom I'm falling behind. I'll never get into college if this keeps up. Her response was a shrug. Frank knows best. The farm needs you more than any classroom. Sometimes I'd show her my hands bleeding blisters, split skin dirt, embedded so deep it never washed away. Look at them, I pleaded. She only murmured, That's normal. Skin hardens with time. It builds character. Character. My hands didn't look like a 14-year-old's anymore. They looked like the hands of an old farmer, cracked and worn. I tried to fight for little fragments of freedom. I'm tired. I just want to see my friends, I told them one Saturday. Frank slammed his fist on the table. You're not leaving this house. Work is your life now. Accept it. His words weren't just rules, they were bars of a cage. And Mom, she was the warden who turned the key, keeping me locked inside. By summer, I worked from sunrise to long past sunset. My body ached constantly. The farm had become my entire world, a prison built from my father's legacy and Frank's cruelty. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of hauling water until my arms burned, I collapsed in my room. I stared at my hands under the dim lamp. They were so ruined, so scarred, they didn't even look like mine anymore. A sob broke out of me before I could stop it. I pressed the pillow over my mouth so no one would hear. Then, through my tears, I saw my phone lying on the desk. A thought came sharp and dangerous, Grandma. I hadn't spoken to her much since Dad's death. Mom had discouraged it, calling her interfering and old-fashioned. But Grandma was my father's mother. She had his strength in her eyes. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. Grandma, I whispered when she answered. Julia, sweetheart. Oh, I've missed your voice, she said warmly. But when she heard my crying, her tone sharpened like steel. Tell me what's happening. The words spilled out in a flood. The blisters, the beatings of dawn, the missed school, Frank's rules, Mom's silence, the endless work. I could barely breathe by the time I finished. Grandma didn't hesitate. Her voice was fierce. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't you worry, Julia. I'm coming. For the first time in 2 years, I felt a flicker of hope. A dangerous, fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. The next morning, the crunch of gravel in the driveway jolted me awake. I rushed to the window and saw Grandma's old sedan pulling up dust trailing behind it like a banner. She stepped out, shoulders squared, her gray hair pinned tightly back. Her eyes blazing in a way I had never seen before. There was no softness, no hesitation, only fury. Mom and Frank emerged from the porch. Frank crossed his arms, already sneering. Mom tightened her robe around her body as though she wanted to vanish. What are you doing here? Mom demanded, her voice brittle. Grandma didn't flinch. I'm here for Julia. She's not going anywhere, Frank barked. His tone was dismissive, almost amused. Grandma's voice cut through the air like a blade. Yes, she is. I ran out the door before anyone could stop me. Grandma. She grabbed my hands and lifted them high, showing the blisters, the scars, the dirt. Ground deep into my skin. Look at these, she spat. This is child abuse. Mom looked away. That small gesture, her eyes turning from me, stabbed deeper than any of Frank's commands. If you don't let her leave right now, Grandma warned, her voice trembling with contained rage. I'll call Child Protective Services. I'll tell them everything. How you've worked her like a slave, how you've kept her from school, and don't think they won't take Kayla too. At Kayla's name, Mom's face went pale. She glanced at Frank, whose expression faltered for the first time. Finally, Mom muttered, Fine, take her. We're tired of her attitude anyway. The words struck like a hammer. We're tired of her, as if I were nothing more than a broken tool. But I couldn't let myself collapse. I ran inside, stuffed clothes into a small bag, grabbed the few personal treasures I owned. When I turned, Kayla was standing in the doorway of her room, clutching a doll to her chest. Where are you going? She whispered, her voice shaking. To Grandma's, I said. My throat burned. Her eyes welled up. Can I come? I froze. The plea wrapped around my heart like a vice. Every instinct screamed to say yes, to grab her hand, pull her into the car, and never look back. But then I thought of how Frank treated her, kind words, gentle touches, school days untouched. She was spared from the cruelty he reserved for me. Maybe she was safe here. Maybe she didn't need to be rescued. You'll be okay, I lied softly. I knelt and hugged her tight, inhaling her little girl scent of soap and hay. I promise. You'll be okay. Her arms clung to me like she knew it wasn't true. I pulled away before I lost my nerve. Grandma waited at the door, her hand firm on my shoulder as if she could hold me together. We walked to the car. Behind us, Frank's voice rang out like a curse, but I didn't listen. The drive away from the farm felt like flying. The fields blurred, the fences disappeared, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. A few months later, it became official. Grandma adopted me. Mom didn't even show up in court, just signed papers, discarding me like an old piece of furniture. At Grandma's house in the city, I found something I'd forgotten existed: freedom. A clean bed that didn't smell of hay and sweat. School days that belonged to me. Evenings with books, laughter, and the hum of normal life. Slowly, the calluses healed. My hands still bore scars, but I could look at them without flinching. I started to feel like myself again, or at least the girl I might have been if Dad had lived. But no matter how safe I felt, Kayla's face haunted me. The way she'd clutched her doll, the way her voice had broken when she asked to come. Her eyes lingered in my dreams, wide and afraid, as if she already knew her turn was coming. And though I didn't know it then, I had left her behind in a prison of her own. Years slipped by, faster than I imagined they could. Grandma's home became my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe without waiting for Frank's voice to thunder through the walls. I went back to school. My grades climbed steadily, almost as if they were healing along with me. By 17, I had friends again. By 18, I was daring to dream about college. Grandma cheered at every step, her pride fierce and unwavering. At 23, I graduated with a degree and moved into a small apartment of my own. I paid my bills, worked long hours, and even found time to laugh with friends. On Sundays, I always returned to Grandma's table, where dinner felt like church sacred, comforting, eternal. Through all those years, contact with Mom was nearly non-existent. A phone call once or twice a year, brittle and distant. Kayla's voice occasionally slipped through the line, always soft, always the same. "I'm fine. Everything's good." I wanted to believe her, needed to believe her, because the alternative, that she was living the nightmare I had barely escaped, was too painful to face. Then one evening, Grandma called me. Her voice carried a tremor I hadn't heard before. "Julia, sweetheart, come over. There's something you need to see." My heart tightened. I drove to her house in silence, headlights cutting across the dark streets. When I stepped into her kitchen, I saw it in envelopes spread across the table, photos spilling out like unwanted truths. "What is this?" I asked. "A letter," Grandma said. Her voice was cold iron wrapped in frost. "From your mother." I picked it up. The words on the page were drenched in arrogance. Mom boasted about the farm, how they had rebuilt everything. New barns, new tractors, gleaming equipment. She bragged about the money, the renovations, how they were living a wonderful life. And then I saw the photos. The farm gleamed, yes. Fresh paint, shining fences, new machinery, lined up like soldiers. In one picture, Kayla stood in front of the barn, 16 now, so changed, I barely recognized her. She was smiling, or at least trying to. "She's grown so much," I whispered, fingers trembling over her face. But Grandma didn't look at her face. Her eyes were fixed lower. "Look at her hands." I frowned. Her hands. Not just one photo, all of them. I spread the pictures across the table. In every single one, Kayla's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her hands hidden. Always the same pose. A memory crashed into me, one I had buried long ago. When Kayla and I were little, Grandma had taught us a secret signal. If we were ever in trouble, if we ever felt unsafe, we'd cross our arms over our chest. Our code for "help me." My breath caught, my chest tightened. "She hasn't forgotten," Grandma said softly. "She's calling for help." The room seemed to tilt around me. All these years I'd believed she was spared, protected by Frank's strange favoritism. All these years I'd comforted myself that at least she was safe. But Kayla's silent signal shattered that lie. She wasn't safe at all. The silence in Grandma's kitchen felt suffocating. The photos lay between us like evidence at a crime scene. Kayla's smile, frozen and hollow, mocked me. I had left her behind. The guilt surged up so violently I pressed my palms into my eyes, as if I could erase what I'd just seen. But I couldn't. Neither could Grandma. "We can't wait," she said firmly. Her voice carried that same unyielding steel from the day she'd rescued me. "If she's signaling for help, we act now." That very week, Grandma contacted a private investigator named Rick. He was a grizzled man in his 50s with a face carved by years of digging into people's darkest secrets. His handshake was rough, his eyes sharp. "I'll find out what's really happening," he promised. Days stretched into weeks. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, expecting it to be Rick with news. In the meantime, I kept staring at those photos, Kayla's arms crossed like shackles. I replayed that day when she had asked to come with me. If I had just said yes, if I had fought harder, maybe she wouldn't be suffering now. Then the call came. Grandma put him on speakerphone. Rick's voice was low but steady. Your granddaughter is being exploited. My stomach dropped. She works from sunrise to sunset. Heavy labor, no breaks. I've got video of her hauling equipment, feeding animals, collapsing from exhaustion. And Frank, his voice sharpened. Frank screams at her constantly. Tells her she doesn't eat until every chore is done. Tells her she doesn't sleep until the fields are finished. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled so badly I gripped the table to steady myself. Send it to us, I whispered. Minutes later, Rick's email came through. Grandma opened her laptop. The first video began to play. Kayla's thin figure staggered under the weight of a heavy crate. Frank's voice thundered in the background. Too slow. Move faster. You'll get nothing tonight if you don't finish. Kayla didn't argue. She didn't even cry. She just lowered her head and kept moving like a machine. Another video showed her kneeling in the dirt feeding animals, while Frank loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. Tears blurred my vision. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. There's more. Rick continued over the line. When she turned 15, they pulled her out of regular school, supposedly homeschooling. But she isn't studying. She spends every hour on the farm. The only time anything resembling school happens is when Frank's brother, he's a teacher at the local school, comes by. But he doesn't test her, doesn't ask questions. He just signs off fake grades. He's covering for them. Grandma's knuckles whitened around the edge of the table. That's fraud and abuse. Worse, Rick added. They fired more farmhands last year. Now Kayla does all their work, alone. She's doing the labor of 2 grown men, at 16. The videos confirmed it. Her body bent under impossible tasks, her shoulders trembling, her face pale and hollow. My chest burned with rage, hotter than anything I'd ever felt. This is exactly what they did to me, I hissed. They've trapped her in the same nightmare. Grandma reached across the table, grasping my hands in hers. Not this time. Not again. We're getting her out. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. And we won't ask permission. 2 weeks later, the air was sharp with November frost when Grandma and I drove down that familiar dirt road. The trees were bare, their branches clawing at the gray sky, and my chest tightened with every mile. I hadn't set foot on that land since the day I escaped. We didn't call ahead. We didn't warn them. We came armed with Rick's videos, with truth, with a fury that had been building for years. The farmhouse rose into view, its fresh paint gleaming like a lie. My hands clenched in my lap. Ready, Grandma asked, her voice calm but hard. I nodded. My heart was hammering, but there was no turning back. We marched up the porch. Frank opened the door, his face flushing red the instant he saw us. What the hell are you doing here? Nobody invited you. Mom appeared behind him, her expression carefully blank. You need to leave, right now. Not without Kayla, I said, my voice cutting through the cold air. She's not going anywhere, Mom replied sharply. This is her home. Grandma pulled out her phone, her hand steady as stone. Then maybe you should see what kind of home it is. She pressed play. The video filled the silence, the sound of Frank's voice roaring. You don't eat until you finish. You don't sleep until it's done. Kayla's small frame bent under the weight of a crate. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Mom's face. Frank's jaw tightened. I have hours of this. Grandma continued, her voice low and lethal. Videos of her working like a slave. Proof you falsified her education. Proof of your illegal use of labor. If you don't hand her over right now, this goes to Child Services, the police, and the news. You're bluffing, Frank growled, but his voice wasn't steady anymore. Try me, Grandma shot back. For a moment, the porch felt like a battlefield. The tension wound so tight I thought it might snap and send us all flying. Then Mom's shoulders sagged. She looked at Frank, then at the phone, and something in her broke. Fine, she whispered. Her voice was flat, drained. Take her. We don't need her anyway. Those words carved into me an echo of the day she'd cast me out. We don't need her. I pushed past them, storming inside. My chest pounded as I climbed the stairs 2 at a time until I reached Kayla's room. She was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, eyes widening when she saw me. Julia. Her voice cracked. We're leaving, I said, breathless. Pack your things. Now. Her hands shook as she grabbed a bag. Stuffing clothes inside without looking. Mom said you hated me, she whispered suddenly. She said you abandoned me. The lie sliced through me like a blade. I swallowed hard. That's not true. I never abandoned you. She froze, tears welling in her eyes. I crossed the room, pulling her into my arms. I'm here now. I won't leave you again. Her body trembled against mine. I felt how fragile she was, how thin, how broken. Minutes later, we walked out together. Frank glared from the porch. Mom turned away, her arms folded, as though shielding herself from shame. Kayla's grip on my hand was so tight it hurt, but I welcomed the pain. It was proof she was real alive and finally leaving with us. When we drove away, the farm shrank in the rearview mirror. For the first time, Kayla wasn't inside its prison. She was free. But freedom, I knew, was only the beginning. Healing would take far longer. The weeks after we brought Kayla home felt like living in a storm's eye, calm on the surface, but with chaos circling just beyond. Kayla barely spoke those first days. She sat in silence, her eyes hollow, flinching at sudden noises. At night, I would hear her muffled sobs through the thin walls of Grandma's house. Grandma, steady as ever, wasted no time. She hired lawyers, filed for custody, and gathered every shred of evidence Rick had uncovered. The trial date was set for 2 months later. When the day arrived, the courthouse loomed tall and cold. Inside, Kayla clung to my hand like a child, though she was 16 now. Grandma stood proud beside us, her presence like armor. Frank and Mom entered with their lawyer faces drawn tight. Frank's arrogance had dimmed, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Mom, in contrast, looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders caved in, as though she carried the weight of every choice she'd made. The judge presided with a cool, steady gaze. Testimonies began. Grandma spoke first, her voice unwavering. She detailed the abuse, the exploitation, the lies. Then Rick presented his evidence, hours of footage of Kayla working past exhaustion. Frank's screams echoing through the speaker's documents, proving falsified school records. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as one video played. Kayla's shoulders slumped, lifting a heavy crate while Frank's voice thundered over her, promising no food until the work was done. The judge's jaw tightened. Frank's brother was next dragged into the light. Under questioning, his lies crumbled. He admitted to signing off false grades, covering for Frank, betraying not just Kayla, but his position as a teacher. Gasps rippled through the room. When it was their turn, Frank and Mom tried to spin their story. Kayla was just helping on the farm, Frank said smoothly, learning responsibility. Mom added weakly, she wanted homeschooling. It was her choice. But the evidence was a tidal wave drowning every word. The judge cut through their excuses. This is not help, he said firmly. This is forced labor. This is abuse. Then, with the hammer of his gavel, he pronounced judgment. I am granting full custody to Karen Thompson, Grandma, and terminating the parental rights of Linda and Frank Smith. A sob escaped Mom's throat. She covered her face, shaking. Frank sat stone still, his mouth a hard-line fury, simmering beneath his silence. But their downfall didn't stop at the courthouse. News of the trial spread fast. Local reporters latched onto the story. Child exploitation, falsified school records, illegal labor. The town buzzed with outrage. Frank's brother was immediately fired and stripped of his teaching license. Parents whispered about him in disgust. And the farm, once Mom's pride, once Frank's fortress, was abandoned by the community. Stores refused to buy from them. Workers refused to return. Neighbors turned their backs. Within weeks, the land began to rot. Fields unplowed, barns unkept. The farm that had once enslaved me and nearly destroyed Kayla began to collapse under its own weight. But the cruelest twist came months later. Grandma heard it through friends in town. Frank had run off, vanished with another woman, a saleswoman he'd been seeing in secret for years. He drained their bank accounts, stripped the house of anything valuable, and left my mother with nothing. No money, no farm, no husband. She was left alone in the ruins of the life she'd chosen over her daughters. After the trial, life shifted into something fragile but new. Kayla was safe now, but she was not whole. At first, she moved like a ghost through Grandma's house, silent, watchful, waiting for Frank's voice to crash through the door even though he was gone. She flinched at sudden sounds, hesitated before eating as if waiting for permission. At night, she woke up gasping from nightmares. Grandma found a therapist who specialized in children who had endured abuse. The sessions were difficult, filled with tears and silence, but slowly Kayla began to open up. Bit by bit, the walls Frank had built around her started to crack. At school, she was behind but determined. She threw herself into her classes with a hunger I recognized because I had lived it once too. I helped with homework when I could, and on evenings when the weight was too much, we sat together on the porch, just breathing in the night air, reminding each other we were free. Sundays became sacred. Grandma insisted on dinner every week, no matter what. The three of us around the table, me, Kayla, and Grandma, sharing food, laughter, even the quiet moments. Those dinners were more than meals. They were proof this is family. Meanwhile, word of our mother's downfall trickled back through town gossip. She had been forced to sell the farm for next to nothing. With Frank gone, she lived in a cramped studio on the edge of the city, working as a cashier scraping by. Sometimes she tried to reach us. A phone call to Grandma's house. A card sent at Christmas or on birthdays. Once she even showed up at the door, her face drawn, her eyes rimmed red. "I just want to talk to my daughters," she pleaded. "Please, I know I made mistakes. I want another chance." Grandma stood like a sentry, unyielding. "You made a choice, Linda. You chose him over them. Over and over again. And now you're alone. That's the life you made." She closed the door in her face. From the living room I watched and felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, just emptiness. Whatever bond had once tied us was gone, severed by years of silence and betrayal. Kayla, when she learned about Mom's visit, only shook her head. "She's not my mother anymore," she whispered. "Grandma is." And in that moment I realized she was right. Blood hadn't saved us. Love had. Loyalty had. Years passed. Kayla thrived. She joined school clubs, made friends, and even began applying to colleges. "I want to study business," she told me one Sunday evening. Her eyes lit up with a spark I hadn't seen before. Maybe even nursing. Something useful. "You can be anything you want," I told her, squeezing her hand. "You're smart enough, strong enough." I built my own life too. I worked hard, earned promotions, and even found someone who treated me with kindness. But no matter how far I went, I never missed those Sunday dinners. One night, the three of us sat at the table plates, scraped clean, Kayla chattering about a university she hoped to visit. "They have an amazing program," she said, her smile radiant. "We'll go together," Grandma promised. "Make it a weekend trip." "Count me in," I added. "A girls' trip." Kayla laughed, the sound bright and unbroken. I looked around that table, the grandmother who saved me, the sister I had finally rescued, the home built not of walls, but of love. And I thought of the letter Mom had written years ago, bragging about the farm and insisting I had missed out on a wonderful life. She had been wrong. The farm was never wonderful. It was a prison. The real wonderful life was this freedom, family love, chosen and nurtured every single day. As I listened to Kayla's laughter and saw Grandma's eyes shining with quiet pride, I realized something with absolute clarity. This was the inheritance Dad had wanted for us. Not barns, not tractors, not money, but strength, resilience, love. And we had it now.